Okay, hi Year 9. I hope you're all well. I hope you all had a lovely half term. Today I'm just going to run through with you a little bit of whole class feedback on the exam question you did this week, addressing some of the misconceptions that you may have had, and then hopefully this will help make your over to you work a little bit easier, as that will be your first task this lesson. So the question that you did last week is a 4-mark explain a similarity or difference. This is the first question you get on the medicine paper. Now, one thing I find about this question is that it's quite wordy. It's a big old question, even though it's 4 marks. So what I suggest that perhaps you do in future is make sure that you highlight the key bits of the question, and I've done it here for you. Okay, so explain one way in which treatments were similar in the medieval period and the Renaissance period. So those bits highlighted in yellow are the really, really important bits for you to take note of, to highlight, to underline, because if you miss out one of these bits, you risk losing marks. So it's really, really important that you pay attention to these particular words. Okay, so we're going to go through what these different bits in yellow mean, okay, and why they might cause a few issues. So explain one way in which treatments. So for this, we must focus on treatments, how disease is treated. Our examples need to give examples of treatment, okay? Not what people thought about the cause of disease, not how people cared for the sick or prevented disease. It's all about how disease was treated, okay? Quite a few of you didn't focus on treatments, and if this was an exam answer, you'd lose marks because you're not addressing the focus of the question, you're not answering the question, okay? So that means that we say no to horoscopes and yes to something like bloodletting and purging, because horoscopes is a belief about the cause of disease. Bloodletting and purging is an actual treatment, okay? So please, please, please do not talk about the cause of disease when they're asking you about treatments, okay? The next keyword is similar. So I need to move my little head bubble now. I'll move myself here. For this, you must focus on continuity, how things stayed the same, how things were similar, not change, how things were different. Okay? It's asking you how it was similar, not different. This is a continuity question, not a change question. Okay, so you need to pick out a similarity. For example, bloodletting and purging. Okay? Our next key word is the medieval period and the Renaissance period. You must compare these two periods. If you compare it to another period, you lose marks. Okay? You must compare the medieval period, which we did before half term, to the Renaissance period, which we're doing now. Okay? So please, please, please don't compare it to the modern day. A few of you did. Okay? I know you did that in your last question, but you need to read the question. Okay? So spending 5 minutes or so, or not 5 minutes, a minute or so, reading through the question can save you from making mistakes. Okay? So, our next thing we're going to look at is how we answer the question. Okay? First thing you do, state the similarity. Okay? One similarity between the two periods was, state similarity. Okay? Next bit, give an example from the earlier period. During the medieval period, I know that, ... Okay? It's important that you use the names of the period, and also that could help you if you get confused of which period you're meant to be comparing. Okay? And step 3, give an example from the later period. So likewise, in the Renaissance period, I know that ... Okay? Remember, we want precise own knowledge here. So we'll look at some examples of what that really looks like. Just have a look at the green box, just to let you know. This question should be no more than 3 or 4 sentences. It's only a 4-marker. Okay, I know we're not doing it in time conditions, in lesson conditions, and it's great to see some of you really spending a lot of time on this question, but you don't need to. Okay, if you were doing this in assessment or in the exam, which you will do eventually, it should only take you 5 minutes. So 3 or 4 sentences max. Similarity was this. Here's an example from the medieval period. Here's an example from the Renaissance period. Okay, and then we move on. It might take you longer than 5 minutes at the moment. That's fine. Okay, that's how long we expect it to take you when you've had lots of practice and you're really, really confident on the subject. So don't worry if it's taking you a bit longer at this time. Maybe we'll say, if we do this again in future, 15 minutes. Okay, because you're a little bit less familiar on the topic and the writing frame and that kind of stuff. So we'll say 15 minutes, but any longer than 15 minutes, you are writing too much. Okay. So let's have a look at these common misconceptions. So this is what I picked out from your answers, and this isn't saying that everyone made this mistake, and it's not the end of the world if you did make this mistake, because we're going to improve on it today and learn from our mistakes, as we do when we do over to you work. But this is what these are the things I picked out that went wrong. Okay, first thing, stating a difference rather than a similarity. Okay, that's our first thing. Second thing, writing about the beliefs beliefs about the causes of disease. So, for example, horoscopes, God, supernatural, any of those words, didn't really want to see them in there, rather than the treatment of disease. Okay? So, how disease was actually treated, not what people thought about disease, it's about how it was treated. And the final misconception, comparing the wrong time periods. Some of you compared the medieval period to the modern day. We did that in the last question. You need to make sure you read through the question and highlight which time periods you need to compare. Okay? So I've picked out some really nice examples that I'd just like us to have a look at, because I think it's really good to see some of the work you're doing. Many of you would have scored 3 or 4 out of 4, which is absolutely fantastic. Okay, so be proud of yourselves for the work you've done. Let's start off with this answer here. So one way in which the periods were similar was the ideas of bleeding as a treatment. Okay, so this person has stated their similarity. Really clear there, that's 1 mark. Okay. During the medieval period, I know that doctors followed the 4 humours theory. I really like that, because that's explaining why bleeding was used, not just describing that bleeding happened. So I really like that, and that's a really top level approach to the question, stating that bleeding is because of that. Well, bleeding happened because doctors believed in the 4 humours theory. So doctors followed the 4 humours theory, which meant that the humours needed to be balanced. This was why bleeding took place. Comparatively, during the Renaissance period, I know that doctors still hadn't been able to find progression in a theory for the 4 humours, so they still practiced bleeding. So that's showing continuity, that doctors still believed in the 4 humours theory, so they still used bleeding. Okay, and saying that the 4 humours theory remained until the 15th century. Okay, so that's a really nice answer. This one is a slightly different approach, but still really nice. One way in which the periods were similar was bathing with or in something to cure disease. So they've chosen bathing as their similarity, which is a slightly more obscure similarity, but still really good. Okay, so during the medieval period, people bathed with dead foxes to absorb their agility and strength. This was primarily used for paralysed people. Okay, so that's really good knowledge there. During the Renaissance period, people bathed in urine because they thought it had the ability to cure disease. Okay, so there is a slight difference there, but it's the idea of bathing still being used. Okay, I like that a lot. This is another one. This is another one on bleeding and purging. Okay, so both treatments were used, and both were humoral treatments, so based on the 4 humours. Okay, so one way in which this was similar, was during the early period. I know that they used bleeding and purging in the medieval period to try and balance the four humours. A little bit messy on the writing there, because we've said during the early period in the medieval period, so that could be tidied up slightly. To try and balance the four humours if they were out of balance, because they believed out of balance humours would cause illness. And comparatively, during the later period, I know that they still use bleeding and purging. How I might improve that is I would tidy up the language a little bit, but I might add something saying during the later period, I know that they also used bleeding and purging because they still believed in the four humours theory. But otherwise, that's a really good answer. And this one's slightly blurry quality, I do apologise. But this one, they've talked about the rubbing of stones to treat disease. And again, really good stuff. Another similarity you could have done. So 4 really good answers there. There weren't just 4 really good answers. All the answers were really good, so well done. But I just chose 4 that I think were really top notch. Okay, so over to you now. So your first task for this lesson is to respond to the feedback I've emailed you individually. Okay, you will have been given T codes. You will have no more than 2 target codes to work on. Okay, and I'd like you, as we do an over to you lesson, you can either edit the work you did last lesson, maybe in a different colour if you've got one. Don't worry if you don't. Just try and show me, maybe just write underneath this is my edit, or if you're typing you can use a different colour. So you could do that, or you could just write it where you are working for today's lesson. It's up to you, but this is your first task for today's lesson, to respond to this. Maybe take about 10 minutes doing it. It shouldn't take too long, and then have a crack at today's lesson. Okay, thank you very much, Year 9, for listening to my lesson. I hope that it was useful for you, and I hope this helps your over to you work. Bye bye.